1, 2. Look out, all cribs. I'm drowned. 1, 2, 3 and away. The next. 1. United Kingdom. Stephanophoros. His throat ached with a desire to cry aloud. The cry of a hawk or eagle on high, to cry piercingly of his deliverance to the winds. This was the call of life to his soul, not the dull gross voice of the world, of duties and despair, not the inhuman voice that had called him to the pale service of the altar. An instant of wild flight had delivered him, and the cry of triumph which his lips withheld cleft his brain. Stephanophoros. What were they now but the crements shaken from the body of death? The fear he had walked in night and day, the incertitude that had ringed him round, the shame that had abased him within and without. Crements. The linens of the grave. His soul had arisen from the grave of boyhood, spurning her grave clothes. Yes, yes, he would cry proudly out of the freedom and power of his soul, as the great artificer whose names he bore, a living thing, new and soaring and beautiful, impalpable, imperishable. He started up nervously from the stone block, for he could no longer quench the flame in his blood. He felt his cheeks aflame and his throat throbbing with song. There was a loss of wandering in his feet. The burn to set out for the end of the year. On. His heart seemed to cry. Evening would deepen above the sea. Night fall open the plains. Dawn glimmer before the wanderer and show him strange fields. and hills and faces. Where? He looked northward towards south. The sea had fallen below the line of sea wrack on the shallow side of the breakwater, and already the tide was running out fast along the foreshore. Already one long oval bank of sand lay warm and dry amid the wavelets. Here and there, warm isle of sand gleamed above the shallow tide, and above the islets and around the long bank and amid the shallow currents of the beach were light-clad figures wading and delving. In a few moments he was barefoot, his stocking folded in his pockets, and his canvas shoes dangling by their knotted laces over his shoulder, and picking a pointed salt-eaten stick out of the gypsum among the rocks. He clambered down the slope of the breakwater. There was a long rivulet in the strand, and as he waded slowly up its course, he wondered at the endless drift of seaweed, emerald and black, and russet and leaf. It moved beneath the current, swaying and turning. The water of the rivulet was dark, with endless drift, and mirrored the high drifting clouds. The clouds were drifting above him silently, and silently the Seagull was drifting below him. And the grey warm air was still, and a new white life was singing in his veins. Where was his boyhood now? Where was the soul that had hung back from her destiny to brood alone upon the shame of her wounds, and in her house of squalor and subterfuge to queen? it in faded garments, and it worries that with hurt at the touch. Or where was he? He was alone. He was unheeded, happy, and near to the wild hurt of life. He was alone and young and willful and wild-hearted, lying amid a waste of wild air and brackish waters and sea harvest of shells and a tangle and wielded grey sunlight and gay-clad, light-clad figures of children and girls and voices childish and girlish in the air. Girl stood before him in midstream, alone and still gazing the out to sea. She seemed like one whom magic had changed into the likeness of a strange and beautiful seabird. Her long, slender, bare legs were delicate as a crane's and pure, save where an emerald trail of seaweed had fashioned itself as a sign upon the flesh. Her thighs, fuller and soft-hued as ivory, were bared almost to the hips, where the white fringes of her drawers were like feathering of soft white down. Her slate blue skirts were kilted boldly about her waist, and dovetailed behind her. Her bosom was as a bird's, soft and slight and soft as the breast of some dark plum-gauged dove. But her long fair hair was girlish and girlish and touched with the wonder of immortal beauty. Her face. She was alone, and still, gazing out to sea. And when she felt his presence and the worship of his eyes, her eyes turned to him in a quiet sufferance of his gaze, without shame or wantonness. Long, long she suffered his gaze, and then quietly withdrew her eyes from his and bent them towards the stream, gently stirring the water with her foot tighter and tighter. The first faint noise of gently moving water broke the silence. Low and faint, and whispering, faint as the bells of sleep, hither and thither, hither and thither, and a faint flame trembled on her cheek. Heavenly God, cried Stephen's soul, in an outburst of profound joy. He turned away from her suddenly and set off across the strand. His cheeks were aflame. His body was aglow. His limbs were trembling. On and on and on and on he strode, far out over the sands, singing widely to the sea, crying to great the advent of the life that had cried to him. Her image had passed into his soul forever, and no word had broken the holy silence of his ecstasy. Her eyes had called him, and his soul had leaped at the call to live, to err, to fall, to triumph, to recreate life out of life. A wild angel had appeared to him, the angel of mortal youth and beauty. An envoy from the fair courts of life to throw open before him in an instant of ecstasy the gates of all the ways of error and glory. On and on and on and on. He halted suddenly and heard his heart in silence. How far had he walked? What hour was it? There was no human figure near him, nor any sound burned to him over the air. But the tide was near the turn, and already the day was on the wane. He turned landward and ran towards the shore. And running up the sloping beach, reckless of the sharp shingle, found a sandy nook amid a ring of tufted sand knolls and lay down there. That the peace and silence of the evening might still the riot of his blood. He felt above him the vast indifferent dawn and the calm processes of the heavenly bodies and the earth beneath him, the earth that had borne him, had taken him to her breast. He closed his eyes in a languor of sleep. His eyelids trembled as if they felt the vast cyclic movements of the earth and her watchers, trembled as if they felt the strange light of some new world. His soul was swooning into some new world, fantastic, dim, uncertain, as under sea, traversed by cloudy shapes, and beings. A word, a glimmer, or a flower. Glimmering and trembling, trembling and unfolding. A breaking light, an opening flower. Its spirit in endless succession to itself, breaking in full crimson, and unfolding and fading to palest rose, leaf by leaf, and wave of light by wave of light, flooding all the heavens with its soft flashes. Every flash deeper than other. Evening had fallen when he woke, and the scents and arid graces of his bed glowed no longer. He rose slowly and recalling the rapture of his sleep, sighed at its joy. He climbed to the crest of the sand hill and gazed about him. Evening had fallen a rim of the young moon, cleft the pale waste of skyline. The rim of a silver hoop embedded in grey sand. And a tide was flowing in fast to the land with a low whisper of her waves. Is landing a few last figures in a distant pool. This video is taken for Navi Daria's page. I hope you enjoy it.